My name is John. I have a background in Army, special warfare, psychological operations, applied anthropology, and other things, as well as language and culture. And I'm currently working on a project, Coast to Coast, to try to revolutionize and innovate and build on how we have conversations, but also how we connect and resonate with different target audiences across our political spectrum and bring together our political moral tribes, if you will. And I've had this concept for quite some time, since my second Iraq deployment in 2006, and then the work at U.S. Central Command and SOCOM in 2007, seeing how we were able to do certain things in the Sunni Triangle of Iraq, for example, driving a wedge between the al-Qaeda foreign fighters and some of the Sunni tribal leaders and the local population, where even if they didn't always agree with us, and they often had issues with the coalition forces or the Iraqi government, they also disliked al-Qaeda, and they were also a prime enemy. So it was in their interest to temporarily partner with each other as well as with us in some ways to try to drive a wedge against the foreign fighters. And by driving that wedge, we separated radicals and extremists from more moderate and reasonable players in the game. At the same time, we accepted the fact that there were certain psychological realities, certain behavioral realities where essentially in a occupied country where much of the population had difficulty connecting with us and us with them, we had to work within that framework, that socio-cultural, behavioral, psychological framework. So we had to be practical in how we engage people across the spectrum, not just Shia-Sunni, but across a spectrum of different alignments and different tribes and sub-tribes, as well as sects and ethno-sectarian interest, and degrees of radicalism and degrees of being willing to work with us. And also how we were able to build a bridge with people who could connect, even if we didn't have perfect agreement. And this approach, this was used in counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan alike, and it greatly served our special operations forces, our operational detachment alphas, our special forces, our Green Berets, our human terrain teams, which I was a part of during 2011 and 12, along the Pakistan border of Nangarhar and Kunar. It's been used by civil affairs and psychological operations, information warfare, and even many of our infantry and other people engaged in counterinsurgency and asymmetric warfare in different ways. Where it's an irregular battlefield, you have to work with what they call the human terrain and understand the human battle space. And in all these cases, we had to adapt and improvise in how we understand how to work with different tribes, different people, and understand different behavioral realities. Why is somebody planning an IED? How do you engage a religious leader or a tribal leader? Or how do you understand why people on the street are siding with a certain political faction or militia or party? And how do we then identify who we can reach and how we can craft a message that resonates with them, as well as build a rapport and build some respect and trust with be it with a village or with a certain area of operations. And this encapsulated the skill set of robust, non-lethal warfighting, where it's a war of ideas, a war of information, and we have to be aware of how this works. Now, that playbook is very practical for using here at home, not through the government, but through private outreach, private social and innovative political movements, or at least nonpartisan movements, done here at home for the purpose of trying to combat the divisive state of political tribalism we see tearing apart this American landscape, this country that people went and fought for, that people have come home from war zones to see how destitute and torn apart our country's become. We've somewhat recovered economically, and I've been through hell and back after the recession. And I know what that's like, and people have gone through far worse. But even though we've economically rebounded to an extent, the way our country's being ripped apart, the conversations being handed to the extremes on the left and the right, and divisive hate and fear-based demagoguery is just ripping apart the fabric of everything we love. And people come home and they see this. And veterans want to stay in the fight, and we also want to connect and employ our skill sets and serve our communities. And I think we can partner with political operatives, people on the left and the right, people working from the young Republicans to the Libertarian Party to democratic causes and activist movements, from Black Lives Matter all the way to movements for us fighting eminent domain in a small town. There's a variety of political views and demographics at play here, but they often can converge on core moral terrain, values they share. And this same skill set that we used in Iraq and Afghanistan to try to drive a wedge between extremists and moderates and try to build a bridge of dialogue, working through the behavioral sociocultural realities of the area. We can employ this same skill set here at home to try to combat the tribalism and build on a science of unity. Now, there's been a divisive science of dividing and conquering and playing poor blacks against poor whites and playing off people's lower brains and their limbic pathways and their fear and their desire to otherize outgroups and creating a false binary opposition between us versus them. There's a science of this, going back to Lee Atwater, Nixon, Reagan, and this has been used ever since. And both sides use it. You can argue which side does it worse, but it certainly. I am well trained in the science of propaganda as well as counter-propaganda. I know human behavioral analysis and target audience analysis and how these people in the media and in politics manipulate and divide people in very visceral and hurtful ways. And this should outrage blacks and whites alike, rich and poor, people that live in the suburbs, people that live out in the farms in West Virginia or Kansas, to people that live in the inner city. We should all be upset. So this looks at how movements all the way from angry Tea Partiers and Republicans that have nowhere to go, that have been pushed out by the dogmatic takeover of that party, that are conservative free thinkers that don't have anywhere to go. We need to empower this voice and connect them with people on the left that are liberal, but they are disillusioned by the state of leftist ideology and the social justice warrior nonsense we see on the extremes. These fringes have pushed out a lot of the moderate, reasonable people, and we can empower this reasonable voice through a multifaceted array of social media, and we can do it in a way that builds bridges of dialogue, maps out common ground, and fights back. Let's have a science of unity, a science of convergence on things we agree with, even as we disagree, even as we stay in our political moral communities. Liberals will be liberals, conservatives will be conservatives. And as a white male, I'll never be able to fully relate to someone, a black person in certain communities or anyone who's black. We could accept these differences. We don't have to all pretend to be in the same boat, but we can find ways to map out common moral and intellectual terrain and converge on commonalities and common frustrations. To some degree, Trump and Sanders have both tapped into this, but we can do better. We can build a movement coast to coast, and we can find a third voice and force that third voice into these debates, into this false left-right dichotomy, and disrupt the status quo of Democrat versus Republican. And we can do this on every level, through every form of media. And this is the next project. People like Dave Rubin are doing this. A lot of friends of mine from places like Iraq and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are coming together and doing this. This can be a global conversation. The alternative to the alt-right is not the extreme ideological SJW left. The alternative to the SJW left is not the alt-right. It is reason and compassion. If we can make these the pillars, realign that conversation, then we have a fight. Let's talk more. ReasonRevival.net. My name is John Curbo, and we can build this together. Thank you.